Before I start this morning, I'd like to take a moment and just acknowledge and recognize the Jewish high holidays and holy days, and particularly Yom Kippur. And I also want to take a moment and acknowledge the recent death of my beloved colleague, the Reverend Rob Eller Isaacs, who was a national leader in our movement and who wrote "We Begin Again in Love," which we use so often to mark this day in this congregation. So I just take a moment today and ask that we hold Rob and Jan and their family in this particular holiday season. I remember that moment. I was in my kitchen at what felt like the height of the end of the world, by which I mean, of course, early 2020. And I remember I was listening to a report about all kinds of things that were happening in the world. There were COVID numbers. Our democracy was in a great state of disarray. And then I heard the stock market report, and the stock market was hitting new highs. And I thought to myself, how can this be? Our world, our country is falling apart, and yet the business world is so happy. That's an oversimplification, I understand. But now, in the spirit of Yom Kippur, I forgive myself, not for the oversimplification, but for my naivete. And when I was a young researcher in my 20-something, learning that someday we would have majority-minority states, and that in fact California was predicted to be one of the first, and in fact, ta-da, here we are. In those days, we used that fact as a reason to support correcting educational inequities and economic inequities for people who were Black, Indigenous, and people of color. With no majority, we thought, as the process played itself out, they would be in leadership, and they wouldn't have to keep doing what the highest-ranking Black legislator in our nation, the Representative James Clyburn of South Carolina, says all older Black people were taught to do. He's talking about his generation. Pick the lesser of two evils to keep the agenda moving. Today, I forgive myself and others for our short-sightedness about the power of power and the power of greed. Now, I had another moment in the kitchen again. I listen to the news a lot in the kitchen. And it was this summer. I was listening to the facts about the extent of voter suppression, all the different things that are being done to suppress voting. And I just wondered how leaders could justify taking action and positions to keep people from voting. It was just against everything I could imagine. And I wondered that from within, of course, my own frame, which said that our biggest shared goal is always democracy. Again, in the spirit of these days, I have to ask for forgiveness for myself, for I did not understand. I really, truly didn't. The democracy as our shared goal was what was now under direct attack. I have a confession. I have not much wanted to pay attention to these midterms. There are probably some others that would join me in that confession. I want to believe that it isn't going to make much of a difference, that nothing that I do is going to help because the nation is so divided. And so today, I must forgive myself for being taken in by the morass that passes for facts today. Facts, or the lack of them, votes, or the lack of them, is what these midterm elections are all about. We are getting fat and stupefied on the diet of lies we are all getting fed, all of us, some of which we're taking in through osmosis, and we better pay attention and start sorting some of them out. The biggest lie, one of the biggest lies, may be around this idea that we are so divided that nothing is possible. That is something that fuels a very specific interest group in our nation. We are feeling division, that is true, and yet it may be because of a very specific agenda which is protecting the interests of the super rich, even if that means that part of that agenda is replacing democracy with some other system, which people are actively working in this election to do. A fact. We all need to decide if we will be defenders of democracy in the here and now, the very soon, and the longer term. Now, in the here and now, let's consider some things. It may not seem like the stakes are that high as they have been in other recent elections. And yet the threats against our democratic system are actually increasing, not decreasing. In this election, the one that's going to happen in a month and a little bit, people in our nation are openly running for office under the banner of being against democracy. They see that as an electable position today. They are emphasizing that we are actually a republic, not a democracy, and that that is the point, not to empower all, but rather to empower the rightful heirs of the nation. In this election, some are running as Christian nationalists, part of a new evangelical movement to take over government, education, the arts, and more. In this election right now, candidates are citing as their heroes people like Joe McCarthy, calling for a new effort like the one that he led to root out those and get rid of those who are teaching pernicious things about race and about gender and about equality. And throughout this nation, so many are working actively to keep people from voting this November. In the New York Times podcast series, The Run-Up, reporter Astrid Herndon has spoken to many would-be voters and has been covering elections for several decades and looks to those who study elections to look at the deepest trends behind these midterm elections. In the first episode of the podcast, The Guardrails, Herndon talks about the exit of mainstream religion, which has been a moderating force in the politics of this nation, and the obsessive entrance of those who are working for this Christian nationalism. If anyone out there is saying to themselves, this is not an appropriate topic for Sunday morning, please know that it is the topic for many Sunday mornings in those pulpits, and that one of the opponents, one of the names for the enemy, one of the names for what they are fighting against is democracy itself. Author Frances Moore Lappé is known for her book, The Diet for a Small Planet. I think it's one of the first books I had as an adult, bought a used copy, in which she advocated for a plant-based diet long before that was a thing. But her most recent book is this one. She did it with Adam Aitchen, and it's called Daring Democracy. It was the UUA Common Read last year, and somehow we didn't really do that in this congregation. We ordered the books, but no one had the energy to engage, so we never really read it. Those books are outside on a table, and I'm going to suggest that we might want to have that common read, not right now, because that's something we can't be doing in the very, very soon, but the near soon. I'll invite you to take one, take it home, and I'll be scheduling that read coming up after the elections in November. You see, change is going to come. It's been a long time coming. Change is going to come. The question is, will we be a part of that change? What is the root of what we're facing? Lappé says it's a development of what she calls the one-rule market, which the only goal of the market is to return the highest return to the existing wealthy, in other words, the top 1% in the United States. Do we remember the Occupy movement, anyone? Now, my need for kitchen forgiveness continues. In addition to taking a dim view of human nature, this current concentration of power has created a spiral of powerlessness that has become this anti-democratic mindset. The beginning of this cycle, Lappé and her colleagues traced to the early 70s, when Particular advocates of a free market declared war on government regulation and public policy, and as the super rich amassed more money, they had the ability to fund more things to continue this agenda. They have funded multiple think tanks. They have created whole new higher education schools, especially in business schools, where these ideas are propagated. And they have also, as we know, developed new ideologically based media types that are now dominating much of our country. LePay notes that the Koch brothers network now spends 2 times more than the Republican National Committee spends on candidates. That network has 107 offices worldwide, to Linda's point about democracy being imperiled throughout our globe. 107 offices worldwide with focuses on youth, Latinos, and veterans, and strategies that pit especially white voters against Black, Indigenous, people of color to keep them blaming one another. Which gets to that discontent, that great divide that I mentioned. Herndon and LePay both agree on one statistic. They both cite it very early on in what they did. No one's happy with our state of our government right now and how it's working. 85% of people polled in this nation consistently over and over again say that things are not going well, and that's on both sides of what's called this political divide. LePay says it's not so much a divide as a divider installed by some of the wealthiest Americans to ensure that we keep the focus of our economy on not restricting the ability of the richest to become richer. And let me add here, I want to say this very clearly, that having a lot of money is not the issue. It is, as LePay points out, the concentration of power and what it has bred. For there are many who are using money for good and to keep and bring people together, but there are many who are not. So I mentioned, we need a strategy for the short term, and then a longer term. And in the short term, we need to counter all the efforts to repress voting and get out the vote. And we need to be educated at the local level, because that's where this change has been brewing for many, many decades, at the local level, at those school boards, at the library boards, the things that we all know intellectually, but maybe aren't taking the time to research. We need to mobilize the vote of others, asking whether our family members, our parents, our children, our grandchildren are voting, our neighbors. In the short term, we have a lot to learn about what's happening with our democracy, and we need to make a pledge not to let our active citizenship end with the casting of that vote. We need to continue to make our voices known, just as those who oppose scientifically and factually based theories from being taught make their voices known increasingly, and increasingly feel empowered to do so. We need to choose what LePay calls civic courage and keep going at it. Change is going to come. The question is, what change? What LePay says is that we are living in a world with a culture of blaming and shaming, othering and apathy, where people have forgotten their own power and agency. And what she's working for is a culture where we have a dispersion of power, transparency, and mutual accountability. We need to stop blaming one another and saying it's because this is the problem. We're talking about pronouns, or we're advocating for Black lives. We need to understand that it's a much more insidious agenda that is using these positions around human rights as a pawn, and it's effective because some of us agree. The thing is, we need to educate ourselves. This agenda is based on exclusion, and our faith calls us to support agendas that are based on inclusion and uniting people. And every faith-based initiative, including those of William Barber III in North Carolina, which is one of the states that has been most radically affected by these new politics, look at how we can build broad-based coalitions to overcome what our 19th century theologians would call this form of evil. This form of evil, this division, is endangering democracy itself. That is not rhetoric, that is truth. We have only to look at the facts. Now, back when I was that idealistic young adult, it never occurred to me that when this democratic shift started happening, it wouldn't be about doing democracy differently. I actually wrote a paper in theological school about how we can do democracy in all different ways. But in some places, Lappé points out, those who oppose inclusive voting are also doing away with many forms of democracy, including many local bodies, by just giving those powers to the state if the party in control shares their agenda. Those who call themselves radicals for capitalism, like the Koch brothers, believe their ends justify the means, as Jane Mayer traces in her very frightening book, Dark Money. Take a breath, everyone. This stuff is not fun. I get it. I sent a text to a colleague last night while working on this sermon. I said, it's a bad sign when instead of working on my sermon, I'm thinking about whether I should adopt hamsters per the New York Times story on mass abandonment of small animals. I did actually go online and look at a few hamsters. Sorry, Michael, it's true. It's hard, and we are all still trying to recover from what happened between 2016 and 2020 that made us realize our democracy was endangered. And yet we cannot afford to have any kind of false confidence. The New York Times Herndon said, we are politically unmoored, we are radically disoriented by everything that has been happening, and yet those who have been organizing for big change are ready to move in on our apathy. Change is going to come. It's a long time coming, right? They've been working for a long time. We who would have democracy as a religious value, stated in our actual current form of purposes and principles, can't afford to turn away during these times. We need to pay attention. We need others to pay attention. We need to get people's attention. And we also need to be part of undoing this with whatever part of our energy we can devote to this. Lappé and coalition leader Reverend William Barber remind us of the power of coalitions where we can support one another and not allow ourselves to be divided, for we are the faith of inclusion, not exclusion, the faith of democracy, not taking away the right to vote. Now, Leslie Baxter and Janet Hoy show us a little bit about the face of civic courage, and we're grateful for them. And Reverend Rodney has been working really hard, wrestling with our printer even today. So you can send postcards, which are outside today. We can let friends know about the work that the League of Women Voters is doing. We've got letters. We have copies of Lappé's book. We can share it with someone when we're done. We can vote. We can encourage others to vote. We cannot let voting be the end of our engagement because, folks, this is a time when we cannot afford to take our eye off the ball. And if we realize now in this moment, sitting here today, that we really haven't been doing enough these last months, it's okay. We can forgive ourselves and each other, and we can begin again in love. We are all victims of this system that profits only a few. Did you know that the UUA phone banks are focusing not on issues, not on candidates, rather just on getting people out to vote? So participate. Or grab some letters or postcards. If you're off campus, we're going to leave some in the drawers for you. A change is going to come. A change is going to come. We cannot afford to be trapped in the illusion of our separateness or lose sight of our unity. If we cannot protect our democracy with all its mess and all its victories, we will be asking ourselves whether we did enough. And then it may be harder to forgive ourselves and each other. Then it may be harder to begin again in love. Conspiracy theories and truths, hard truths, have one thing that's different among them, and that is facts. So let us remember that change is going to come. And let us be part of that change.